Howdy, 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 everyone. Jim back again for another installment of Lunch and Learns with Jim. Today we are going to talk about the psychology of trust. I taught this class here a year or so ago, and I really liked kind of all the variables about trust and who should we trust, who can we trust, can we even trust ourselves? So it's an interesting thought, especially right now with the internet and a ton of misinformation. Trust is a really, really tricky concept. We put our trust in family, friends, and strangers every single day. Some of these things are little, some are a huge deal. We trust that the sun will come up in the morning. We trust that the people we love will be there for us in a time of need. And even that when we order food at a restaurant, they're going to bring it out exactly how we ordered it. Everything from relationships to our work environment to even something as simple as driving in our car relies completely on trust. Take example, driving in our car. We trust that our car will start. We trust that we will be able to get to where we need to go, that the cars that will stop at a red light, the traffic behind us will slow down and stop when we do. Then there are more complicated relationships. We trust that information we hear is accurate, whether it's from friends or the media. If we don't trust certain entities, we decide who to put our faith in and to what capacity. Who is worthy of our trust? Is it a trust that is all-encompassing or only for certain things? We are constantly weighing all these variables. Usually it's happening subconsciously in the blink of an eye. We don't even think about it. So today, we're going to learn between psychology, science, and our own tendencies. We'll uncover who we tend to believe, why we believe in them, and then ask if we can trust anyone 100% of the time, and can we even trust ourselves in our own judgment? Let's find out, shall we? So first off, what is trust? Trust is a really difficult thing to easily define. The definition can vary depending on who you ask. One psychologist asked people from across the globe what the word trust meant to them. So you can see trust is when you like someone at the top, feeling safe, when my heart feels at home, to something more complicated. Trust is what I see written on the face of my daughter every time she looks at me, implicit faith that I will protect her and care for her no matter what. So a ton of different ideas about trust, some really fascinating ones from across the country, or sorry, across the world. Now, trust, the word has its origins in the Indo-European root drust, meaning solid and lasting. In Old English, it referred to confidence and dependence, while in the 14th century, Chaucer used the word to mean virtual certainty and well-grounded hope. Other people have an equation for it that it's consistency over time, or credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation, whatever that means. But researchers in social psychology differentiate between two kinds of trust, affective and cognitive. Cognitive trust is based on our knowledge and evidence about those we choose to trust. Affective trust is born out of our emotional ties with others. This includes the security and confidence we place in others based on the feelings generated by our interactions. Sometimes the differences of cognitive and affective trust have been described as trusting with your head, cognitive, or your heart, affective. Who can we trust? This quote, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. I love that quote. People lie so often that it might seem like the only person you can trust is yourself. We can trust ourselves, right? Well, actually, there are so many ways that we participate in self-deception. We pretend that feelings are facts. If I feel hurt, that means that someone must have treated me poorly. It can't just be that I overreacted. We very rarely blame ourselves. If a relationship doesn't work out, we often put the blame on the other person. If we're self-conscious about something, we may not admit the real reason why. Or we may blame our upbringing for bad behavior instead of taking ownership of how we're currently behaving. We put false information on our driver's license. Maybe we lie about what our weight is or our height. We tell ourselves we'll start that diet tomorrow. We'll project our insecurities and fears onto other people. And we all do it. This behavior starts very early in our lives. So who remembers something from your past only to have a family member dispute some of the details? So maybe the sweater you received from your grandmother was red, not blue. Maybe it was both. The cookies that you left out for Santa, maybe you swear that they were Oreos, and another family member says, well, no, of course not. They were Salerno butter cookies. It turns out our memories just aren't that reliable. Eyewitness experts know this, And that's why eyewitness testimony is so infrequently used. It's shockingly easy to mislead someone. How easy is it? Let's find out. So who has played the board game Monopoly? Maybe you've played it once, many times. Who's familiar with Rich Uncle Pennybags, the Monopoly man? You know, the guy with the white mustache, top hat, tuxedo cane. Does he have a monocle? If you say yes, he does. Okay, what eye does he have the monocle over? Is it on his left eye or his right eye? And how confident are you? What if I told you he doesn't have a monocle over either eye? Ever since he was introduced in Monopoly's community and chance cards in 1936, he has never had a monocle, ever. But that hasn't stopped many of us from oftentimes picturing him with a monocle. Why is that? It could be something as simple as us confusing him with Mr. Peanut. He's got a cane and a top hat, and he does have a monocle, so we might confuse the two. Granted, a man is very different from a peanut, but we might associate some of those things and then just lump them all together in our memory. This phenomenon was dubbed the Mandela effect by Fiona Broome in 2009. Many people falsely believe that human rights activist Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, when really he died a free man in 2013. She explains the Mandela effect as what happens when someone has a clear memory of something that never actually happened in what she calls this reality. And she's not talking about conspiracy theories or false memories. She thinks that parallel realities exist and there is no one-size-fits-all answer. Okay, so that's one explanation. Jean Brewer, PhD and Associate Professor in Cognitive Psychology at ASU, has another explanation, and it doesn't involve alternate realities. He says this is an example of how our brain works to retrieve information. Quote, "What we know about false memory is that it arises through the reconstruction process. When you recall an event, you use memories around it, taking elements or pieces of other events and fitting them where they make sense. And that is how Mr. Monopoly gets a monocle." There are other examples as well. Who remembers Ed McMahon showing up on doorsteps to hand people oversized checks and balloons because they struck it rich with Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes? What if I told you he never made any house calls? And he also didn't endorse Publishers Clearinghouse. He endorsed American Family Publishers, which was a rival sweepstakes promotion. Despite this fact, that doesn't stop numerous articles referencing Ed McMahon with Publishers Clearinghouse, and you can see them up above highlighted. But even Ed McMahon misremembers. Quote, "For years, the question everyone would ask was, 'What's Johnny Carson like?' he says with a laugh. Now they say, 'Where's my $10 million?' Thinking I'm there to give them the Publishers Clearinghouse prize money." It's interesting that he wouldn't even talk about the company that he's actually with or endorsing. He's referring to Publishers Clearinghouse, so he probably thinks that that's where he worked. What about Jiffy peanut butter? How many of you have had Jiffy peanut butter growing up? The answer is none of you. You may have had Jif peanut butter or Skippy, but never Jiffy. And if you ask people, some might say, yeah, I remember growing up. I remember Jif and I remember Skippy, but there was a Jiffy peanut butter. I remember it clearly. There wasn't. There was a Jiffy corn muffin mix, but there was never any Jiffy peanut butter. Despite that, people swear up and down that yes, they have had Jiffy peanut butter. Does not exist. Movies are such a huge part of our culture. Some of these movies and characters help shape our childhood. They teach us right from wrong. They're there for us in times of need, especially right now. You would think we would accurately remember them when we quote them, but we don't. Here are 3 examples of some of the most quoted lines in cinema that unfortunately never happened. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all?" One of the most famous lines from Snow White never happened. She actually says, "magic mirror on the wall," not mirror, mirror. And you can look all these up on YouTube if you want. I'm not going to play the clip since you can't hear it anyway, but just take my word for it. Or again, look for yourself. Star Wars, the most famous line in the 1980s Star Wars sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. "Luke, I am your father." It's perhaps the most incredible reveal in the history of cinema, and we all remember it incorrectly. Darth Vader simply just says, "I am your father." He never says Luke. In Silence of the Lambs, one of the most famous lines from Silence of the Lambs is when Jodie Foster, Clarice, meets Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal Lecter, for the first time. Hello, Clarice is on t-shirts, mugs, it's even referenced in TV shows, but Hannibal Lecter just says, good morning. He never says, hello, Clarice. And we don't just mess up movies. It turns out we also royally screw up books. Thank goodness for that. Many of you would name this character right here as Frankenstein, but it's not. It is Frankenstein's monster created by Dr. Frankenstein and his trusted hunchback lab assistant Igor, right? Actually, it doesn't say anywhere in the book that Frankenstein is a doctor. He's a student, and he doesn't have a sidekick either, nor is he named Igor. In some adaptations, he does have a lab assistant, but it's believed Igor is just simply a stock henchman character of Gothic literature. But you will not find the word or name Igor anywhere in the book by Mary Shelley. Characters are often misquoted as well. Read any of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes books, and you will never find any occurrences of the detective saying, "Elementary, my dear Watson." But if I said, "Elementary, my dear Watson," who said that? 99.9% of you would say Sherlock Holmes. We're not only guilty of misremembering movies and books, we misremember our favorite cartoon characters from how to spell their name to what they look like, and we even misremember popular brands that you probably have in your home right now. So let's go first. Who is this family? Some of you may have read these books to your grandkids, to your kids. So is it Berenstain Bears with an A or Berenstain Bears with an E? It is Berenstain Bears, written by Jan and Mike Berenstain with an A. What is this cartoon? Is it Looney Tunes with two O's or Looney Tunes as in like music tunes? It's Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes shorts with a U were made by Warner Brothers to compete with Disney's musical animations, Silly Symphonies. What about Mr. Rogers? So a lot of you might have seen the documentary or the movie with Tom Hanks. How does this song begin? It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's a beautiful day in my neighborhood. It's a beautiful day in our neighborhood. It's actually a beautiful day in this neighborhood. I was shocked when I saw that. I could have swore it was a beautiful day in the neighborhood. What's the name of this air freshener? Febreze? Is it with two E's or one E? It's one E in the middle. Febreze. Who is this modern Stone Age family? Flintstones, meet the Flintstones? Is it Flint or is it Flintstones? It's Flint with a T, Flintstones. Does Curious George have a tail? No, he does not have a tail. Just read that book 2 nights ago. Turns out he still does not have a tail. So with all those, and if you got all those right, good for you. Please let me know. You get an award. I'll have to mail something to you. If you didn't, that means you're normal. Whether you believe in alternate history, parallel universes, or you just have a bad memory, it doesn't matter. The real question is, can you trust your own memory? And if you can't, what or who can you trust? We are products of our experiences. We learn from our mistakes and we use that information moving forward. If we have a bad experience with a restaurant or a person or a specific company, we tend to avoid them in the future and we tell others to do the same. That behavior could protect us from potential mishaps. So that's good. That also influences who we trust later on. But the question is, do facts matter? With our memory issues, obviously these are pretty low stakes. No one's life is on the line. And these are all basic facts that can be researched. Either Curious George has a tail or he doesn't. Ed McMahon worked for Publishers Clearinghouse or he didn't, even if he doesn't even remember himself. But that can all be researched and verified. What if we talk about more vague concepts? What if it's recalling an instance when someone wronged you or how someone or something made you feel? That's not nearly as tangible. Do you believe a politician or celebrity that's on trial when they claim their innocence? Do you trust a family member over a friend? Do the facts even matter? Turns out, no, they do not. People have a tendency to strengthen their already established views when they are presented with data that supports it, but they completely ignore data that contradicts their existing views. We try to discredit information that doesn't match what we think. We think, well, there must be a reason why this information is wrong. And if you look long enough, especially with the internet, you're bound to find something and many people that agree with you. This is called confirmation bias. We do this all the time. And it's also at play with trusting people. If someone tells us to be wary or cautious of a certain individual before meeting them, we will ignore all the signs that this new person should be trusted because we're so fixated on the previous negative information we have received. So someone might have the best intentions in mind, but you read into it. You think that things that they're doing aren't as maybe sincere as they appear. Who would you trust between the two faces, the one on the left or the one on the right? A 2008 study found that people largely tend to agree on who does and who doesn't look trustworthy, with the areas around the eyes and mouth being the most relevant. And no, that doesn't mean that people with trustworthy faces behave in the most trustworthy manner. It's just who we have a tendency to trust. So who do you trust, left or right? When we first meet someone, we look for signals of authority and competence. We're more likely to trust people based on what they're wearing. For instance, a white lab coat. There have been hundreds of studies with an emphasis on trust. One of the most common ways psychologists and economists study trust is through what's called the trust game. The first player can choose to place a large sum of money in the hands of the second player. The second player is not required to reciprocate and can keep the money for themselves. So the possibility of betrayal of the initial investment simulates many real-life situations involving trust. And there have been a lot of fascinating insights into the psychology and neurobiology of trust. And for the record, with these faces, people tend to say the person on the left appears the most trustworthy. In a 2015 study, participants were under the illusion that they were playing an economic investment game with 3 different players: a close friend, a stranger, or a computerized slot machine. In reality, participants were actually playing against a computer with a simple algorithm that systematically reciprocated actions worthy of trust exactly 50% of the time from all 3 of those people, or whatever you want to call it. Based on perceptions of trust, participants reported positive interactions with the quote close friend to be more rewarding than interactions with a stranger or slot machine, and they were much more likely to invest with this player, even though, again, every single one of those instances, they were reciprocated positively 50% of the time. It was the same for everyone. This illustrates our innate human desire to connect with others and create close-knit bonds, even if these ties are based on blind trust, or they could lead to Ponzi schemes. We still want to trust people. Brain imaging of the participants showed that 2 specific brain regions were actively engaged when someone thought they were trusting a close friend. It's the ventral striatum and the medial prefrontal cortex. The ventral striatum is considered a key pathway in human reward processing and positive emotions. The medial prefrontal cortex is associated with how we perceive another person's mental state and monitoring what's happening outside our current focus of attention. It also plays a role in decision-making as well as retrieving and consolidating memories. Even though all 3 players behaved in exactly the same way, sharing 50% of the time, participants consistently trusted the quote good friend more than the other imaginary players throughout the game. Participants felt a greater social reward when they believed their good friend had reciprocated cooperation during the game because of these regions in the brain. There have been other findings. The hormone and neurotransmitter oxytocin increases trust, likely by suppressing the neural systems that regulate our fear of betrayal. When we feel negative emotions, we are less likely to trust others, and we may base our decisions about whom to trust on their attractiveness, how much they resemble our kin members, and their facial features. One study, for instance, showed that males with relatively wider faces, which is a feature associated with testosterone, were less likely to be trusted during the trust game. Interesting. Other findings, women tend to share their wealth and trust games more than men. Not really surprised about that. People may have a preconscious friend or foe mental mechanism that helps them to evaluate others during interactions, so partners are trusted more than what they view as opponents. Genetic variation and heredity influence how people invest or reciprocate during trust games. Trust in strangers increases from childhood to early adult and then remains more or less stable in adulthood. And there are differences in levels of trust across cultures. So Americans are more trusting of others compared to the Japanese or Germans during trust games. That's interesting. Can we increase our trust? The good news is, yes, we can increase our ability to trust in ourselves, to trust in others, and allow them to trust in us. As is the case with most things, it starts with ourselves. We've already established that we're all a pack of liars. Fine. So maybe the best we can hope for is to be honest liars. The first step is for better self-awareness and to become observers of ourselves. So when you have a strong emotional reaction to something, pause. When what you say doesn't match how you act, pause. When you're thinking irrational thoughts, pause. When you're unresolved about something or someone, pause. Ask yourself, what does this say about me? What does my reaction to this situation say about me? What am I really feeling? As we become more honest and aware, we also become more responsible for our choices. If we admit we're insecure about something, now we're left with a choice. We can either work on our insecurity or not. You can't control other people, but you can control your reactions to them. You can also be honest about what your reactions are and why you're having that reaction. What is triggering you? Is it the person? Is it the topic? Is it a combination? Studies have shown that trust isn't built on one gesture, but instead dozens and even hundreds of small ones. Remembering someone's preference for something, saving them a seat in a crowded room, or attending a funeral for a friend's family member, that all builds a tremendous amount of trust. What does it all mean? It means you can be an honest liar. Choose to become more honest about the lies you tell yourself. Choose to trust others and reward the people that deserve it, allowing others to trust you in the same way. I hope this was somewhat informative at least. I hope you guys learned something from it. I know trust is a big topic, especially with the news and with friends and family and everything right now. So maybe you can apply this. If not, at least hopefully it was interesting enough for you. Hope you guys are doing well. Take care, and we will see you next week.